Yes guys, I hope you're all good and welcome back to the YouTube channel. So today I'm going to go through how you can get shredded for summer. So as a lot of you might know, I've been doing a competition prep for the last 5 months, and because of that I brought my body composition from this all the way to this. So I've kind of got shredded for summer as a byproduct of this competition prep. But in this video I'm going to go through everything you need to know with regards to training, nutrition, setting out a plan, cardio, also managing fatigue throughout the diet as well, and therefore you can go into the next few months knowing exactly what you need to do to maximise this diet going forward and bring your best shape for summer. So I'm going to basically go through firstly how you should plan out a diet, understanding what your starting position is and therefore knowing what you should do along the way to ensure that you get into condition in time for summer. Next, I'm going to go through your training, how your training might change throughout a diet depending on your body composition and your recovery capacity as well. Next, I'm going to go through your nutrition, so any changes that you might make to your nutrition, whether that be your carb intake, fat intake, protein intake, etc. And then also how you can manipulate your nutrition to make sure you're maximising performance along the diet as well. And then I'm also going to touch on topics such as cardio, managing fatigue, and also your mindset in the diet as well. So I'll get started with your starting point and also planning out a plan of action going forward, or a timeline you could call it, for the diet as a whole. So I think understanding what your starting point is when you're beginning a diet is extremely important, because you want to know how much weight you're going to pull off to get into your desired condition. So in terms of predicting your body weight at the end of a diet when you're in peak condition, I'd look at previous pictures from your previous diets, understanding basically how lean you got in those diets, if you want to get leaner, if you don't want to get quite as lean, but also how much muscle mass you put on since that diet to understand what your body weight might be at the same body composition. But obviously with more muscle mass, your body weight will be higher. If potentially you haven't dieted before and you don't have any pictures to go off from previous diets, what you can do is make a rough estimate of what your body fat percentage is now, and therefore you can make an estimate of what your body fat might be at the end of the diet, depending on what body fat percentage you want to get down to. So for example, if you're a 200-pound male and you're predicting that you're around 20 to 25% body fat, that means you're going to be carrying between 40 and 50 pounds of body fat on your frame at the moment. So we can take that as your current body fat mass, and then if we take away, say, 20 pounds of that, and now you're looking at 20 to 30 pounds of body fat mass. If you then take that as a percentage of your new weight, which will be 180 pounds, you can work out what body fat percentage you'll be at each weight. This obviously isn't going to be the most accurate way of doing things, because you're not just going to lose body fat in a diet, you're going to lose intramuscular fullness from glycogen and triglycerides. You're also going to lose a small amount of weight just because you're going to have less food volume in your stomach. But I think this can give you quite a good prediction of where your body weight might be at the end of a diet. So for example, with me, at the start of prep, I was around 170 pounds and I predicted myself to be between 20 and 25% body fat. So that meant I was carrying between 34 and 40 pounds of fat. So I knew if I pulled off a good 25 to 30 pounds, that would put my fat mass between 10 and 15 pounds, and that would put me below 10% body fat. So I kind of had an idea of where my body weight was going to be at the end of prep, between 140 and 145 pounds, and therefore I could make a plan going forward of the rate of loss I needed over that prep and how long the prep would need to be as well. An important thing to note is that if you've got a lot of weight to pull off, for example, over 15% of your body weight to get into the condition you want to get into, it's probably a good idea to split this diet up into multiple diets. So for example, with me, the peak weight I got to in my off season, as you can see here, was 186 pounds. So doing that big diet all the way into stage condition from 186 pounds would mean I had to pull off around 45 pounds of weight in that time. While it isn't impossible to pull that amount of weight off in one go, it's going to make the diet a lot harder at the end of the day, because you're going to have to diet on a lot lower food and a lot higher expenditure to get the weight off in the end. Just because your body along the way is going to keep adapting to the new expenditure and the new calorie goals that you're setting for itself, and therefore you're going to have to keep pushing food lower and lower, pushing expenditure higher and higher to get all of that weight off. But if you have a small amount of weight to pull off, you won't accumulate quite as much adaptation throughout the diet, because obviously you're not pulling off as much weight in one go, and therefore your body doesn't need to quickly adapt to that scenario. So if you are in the position where you've got a lot of weight to pull off, I'd definitely split the diet up into 2, if not 3 different diets, and then you're pulling your weight down, say around 10% of your body weight in each diet, and then in between each diet, you want to push your food back up, relieve some of those adaptations that you've accrued during the diet, and therefore you can go back into another diet, nice and fresh, mentally fresh as well, and therefore you can attack that next diet and get the intended weight off in the long term. In terms of a rate of loss throughout the diet, it's going to depend a lot on your current body fat levels, but in general, what the research says is that we want to keep our rate of loss between 0.5 and 1% of your body weight per week. So for example, for a 200-pound male or a 200-pound individual, you'd want to pull off no more than 2 pounds a week throughout the diet. So now that you know the amount of weight you've got to pull off, and you know the rate of loss you want to be going at throughout the diet, you can kind of make a timeline as to how long that diet needs to be. You'd probably want to start the diet with the rate of loss of around 1% of body weight, and then throughout the diet, as you get leaner, as your propensity to lose muscle increases, you'd want to slow that rate of loss down to therefore hold on to more performance and therefore hold on to more muscle mass as well. So I'd start off at around 1% of body weight per week and pull that down throughout the diet to around 0.5. So for example, again, for a 200-pound individual, you'd want to be pulling off around 2 pounds per week at the start of the diet, pulling that down to around 1 pound per week towards the end of the diet when you're getting much leaner and therefore have a bigger propensity to lose muscle. So with this rate of loss, the diet's probably going to end up being a lot longer than you might initially think. But at the end of the day, if you want to create the best physique at the end of it, you want to hold as much muscle mass as possible. Also create a lower stress environment throughout the diet, and therefore having a slower approach is going to be much more effective in creating your best look at the end of the day. The next thing I want to touch on before you actually get started with the diet is actually your mindset going in, because a lot of people struggle within the diet to maintain adherence throughout and therefore make sure they're sticking to the calories, sticking to the expenditure and getting the weight off in the long term. I think going into a diet, it's very important to note it's not going to be easy. Your body does not want to lose weight. Your body wants to stay at maintenance. Humans have adapted over time to make sure that they're not losing weight, because obviously if you continue to lose weight over time, you'll end up dying. So that's why you don't want to lose weight, and that's why your body will adapt to the deficit over time and try and pull you back up to maintenance. And therefore, it's probably going to be quite hard. Your body's going to try and pull you back to maintenance in multiple different ways. So it's going to make you more hungry through fluctuations of hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin. It's going to make you more lethargic as well, and therefore your energy expenditure is lower. It might even make you more food focused, so you're constantly thinking about food. So these things are going to make the diet quite challenging, but I want you to see this as a challenge. See it as that. You want to be going into the diet looking to test yourself mentally. How far can you push yourself while sticking to the diet? That's what I always say to my clients. You don't want to see this as an easy thing going forward. You want to see it as a mental challenge. You want to prove yourself that you can do something that's quite hard. And therefore going into the diet with that mindset is going to be much more effective and hopefully allows you to adhere throughout. The same goes for training as well. So when you're in the diet, training is going to get a lot harder, and your mindset needs to be in a good space where you're mentally resilient enough to keep trying to lift heavy weights and keep trying to maintain performance throughout. Another thing that I did want to touch on is that diets are going to be harder for some people than it is for others. A lot of people just think that people who are overweight or obese are lazy, but a lot of the time this isn't the case. They've got a higher body fat set point, they've got a higher body weight set point, and therefore when they go under this level, their body's going to make more of those adaptations to try and bring them back to that level. And therefore the diet is going to be harder for some people. For example, with me, I didn't really have any negative effects of dieting until I was below 70 kilos. And therefore it's pretty easy for me to stick to a diet until I'm below 70 kilos because I'm not really that hungry, I'm not really that lethargic, and therefore it's very easy to stick to. But some other people might find it very hard to get below, let's say 100 kilos, because their body wants to be above 100 kilos and their set point where they naturally go to when they're just eating whatever they want is around 100 kilos. And therefore it is going to be harder for some people than others. But at the end of the day, you've been dealt the card you've been dealt with, and therefore there's nothing you can do about this. You've got to work around that and do whatever you can to adhere to the diet in either circumstance. So that's pretty much setting up a diet gone through. I'm now going to go through training and how your training might be affected throughout a diet. So I think the most important thing to note here is that you don't want your training intensity to change whatsoever throughout a diet. You need to still be training in a close proximity to failure throughout your whole diet to make sure that you're giving the muscle a reason to stay around, basically. So the exact same intent you give to your training within your gaining phases should be the same intent you're giving to your training in your dieting phases to make sure that you are keeping that muscle around. The one thing that I would change going into a diet is making a few changes to exercise selection. So as we diet down, we're going to obviously lose body fat, and therefore we're going to have less fat around our joints. What that's going to mean is that you're going to be a lot less stable within movement patterns, and therefore making some small changes to your programming to make sure that your movements have more external stability, and therefore you may be using more machines rather than free weights. These changes can be very effective in terms of holding on to performance throughout the diet because you've got that additional stability there to help you out when you do lose that body fat from around your joints. Also, you can think about it this way: if you're on a free weight movement and you're getting very lean, can you take that movement to true muscular failure? If you're on a bench press and you're shaking all over the place, can you really take your chest to true failure on that movement? And if you can't, you're probably not providing it with the stimulus it needs for the muscle to stick around, basically. So don't be scared to change out free weight movements for machine-based work, because at the end of the day, all we're doing is stimulating muscles. There's nothing special about a free weight movement at the end of the day. Machines are going to be more stable, and therefore they might be more effective in a dieting phase to make sure that you can potentially even give yourself the chance to grow in that dieting phase. While I do think it's very important to keep the intensity there, I think sometimes it is important to understand when to drop the load, because at the end of the day, you're probably not going to maintain your strength throughout the whole of the diet if you're getting quite lean. So understanding when to take a load drop is very important. So I think the main thing to note here is understanding when you're not giving the muscle a stimulating set, basically. When you're going into a set and you don't really get much out of it, and you come out of the set, you don't really feel the muscle working, you feel like you've got a bit of a low rep set maybe, and therefore you've really not given the muscle enough stimulus to hopefully continue to progress it or continue to keep the muscle around in the long term. So what I'd do in this scenario is just take a load decrease and get a more stimulating set out of the movement. And potentially after that, after you've made a significant load decrease, you can look to slowly increase the load again by micro-loading the weight going forward. So understand when to take the load reduction to make sure that you are providing the muscle with stimulating sets every single week. The final thing that I want to talk about with regards to training is your recovery capacity. So as you get leaner, as your food gets lower, your recovery capacity will decrease throughout a diet, and therefore we need to match our recovery demand to our recovery capacity. So what we need to do throughout a diet is decrease that recovery demand in line with our recovery capacity. So what I'd recommend doing is slowly decreasing your training volume across the diet basically. You don't want to overthink this too much, but you'll know when you're not recovering from your sessions. Firstly, just through DOMs. If you're going into the next session of the same muscle group with DOMs still being apparent, muscle soreness being apparent, then you probably aren't recovered enough for that following session. And therefore you might want to take away certain sets to make sure that you are recovering to hit the same muscle group again in a few days. And the other way to understand if you are basically not recovering from your sessions is if your numbers are completely falling off a cliff. If you're seeing that your strength levels throughout rep ranges are massively decreasing, then that's showing that you're probably not recovering in between your sessions and therefore probably need to make a change with regards to training volume. So that's pretty much training covered. I'll go on to nutrition now. So the first thing I want to speak about when you go into a diet is understanding what initial change to make. So you're on a certain amount of calories, you're on a certain amount of macros. What change do you want to make at the start of a diet? So I'd always say you want to be very aggressive at the start of a diet. At the start of a diet is when your body fat levels are going to be the highest, and therefore you're going to have the lowest propensity to lose muscle. Training performance is in a really good spot, food's really high, and therefore you have a lot of tools to play with to basically create that deficit without basically risking training performance decreasing. So that first change to nutrition should probably be quite a big one to create that deficit at the start that you want to basically be aggressive with. So I'd usually say between 20 to 30% of your initial calories that you were on before should probably be around what you want to drop in the first week of dieting. And then from there, along the way, all you want to do is basically make small changes as your body weight begins to plateau. So between 25 and 50 grams of carbs, between 5 and 10 grams of fats, and then pretty much keeping protein consistent throughout the whole diet. I'll now go through each individual macronutrient and how they are affected throughout a diet. So I'll start off with carbs, and obviously we know that carbs are our main source for energy within weight training, and therefore they should again be prioritized within a diet. You probably want to go with a higher carb approach to make sure that you are maintaining training performance throughout a diet, and therefore probably making up most of your calories through carbs. With protein, it's pretty simple again. You probably want to keep it around 1 gram per pound throughout the diet. You might even find benefits of going slightly higher from a satiety standpoint because protein is going to be the most satiating macronutrient, but usually around 1 gram per pound is about right. And finally, with fats, I'd probably keep them around a baseline throughout the diet between 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram, and that should allow you with a lot of room to push up your carbs and therefore create the deficit with a high carb, low fat approach. So that's all the basics with regards to nutrition gone over. I'm now going to go over how you can basically maximize your training performance throughout the diet through peri-workout nutrition. So peri-workout nutrition is going to be your biggest friend when it comes to dieting and maintaining training performance. So what you want to do is basically keep as many carbs around your training window as possible throughout the diet. So initially you might have carbs in each of your meals throughout the day, but as you start to decrease calories throughout the diet, you probably want to be taking away those carbs from meals outside of your training window, keeping the carbs in your pre-workout meal, in your intra-workout meal potentially, and also in your post-workout meal. What I'd say is that pre-workout nutrition is probably going to be the most important out of all three, just because you're providing your body with that readily available glycogen to use within your workout. So I'd probably take away carbs from your intra and your post-workout before you do from your pre, and try and keep that pre-workout carb intake at a pretty high amount throughout the whole diet, preferably above 1 gram per kilogram throughout the whole diet, and take away carbs from other meals away from your workout, and then potentially your post and your intra. So earlier I touched on how your body adapts to the diet by making you more hungry, making you more food focused, but how can we actually manage these things? So in terms of hunger management throughout a diet, what I say is that you don't want to be applying all your tools at the very start of the diet. What I'd recommend is slowly implementing these hunger management tools across the diet, and therefore by the end of the diet you're using a lot of tools to hopefully manage hunger and therefore maximize adherence. If you implement all the tools at the start of the diet, what can lead to happening is that you want to continuously increase the amount of tools you're using, but you've run out of tools to use. So for example, volumizing your foods. Throughout a diet you might want to volumize your foods more to make sure that you're filling yourself up more with each meal. But if you implement this tool too early, then you're going to want to keep volumizing your foods even more and more throughout the diet, and in the end you're going to be eating so much volume of food and basically still not becoming full, because your body's going to adapt to that. The stretch receptors in your stomach are going to adapt to the amount of volume of food in your stomach, and therefore it's going to keep wanting more again and again. And therefore it's probably better to slowly implement those tools over time, so you're maximizing the use of those tools at the very end of the diet when you really need them. Other things that can help with hunger management are going to be fiber intake. So increasing your fiber intake is going to slow down the digestion of meals and therefore hopefully fill you up for a bit longer. Protein intake, the most satiating macronutrient as I mentioned earlier, increasing your protein intake can massively help with hunger as well. And then finally, probably the most important one is just keeping keep them busy. The busier you stay, the less you're going to be thinking about food, the less you're going to think about being hungry, and therefore, hopefully, the more adherent you can be throughout the diet. In terms of minimizing food focus, this is going to be very individual. So some people find that by basically staying very balanced, they can therefore manage their food focus over time by providing themselves with some of the foods that they might want. But other people find that they need to be much more strict, because as soon as they have a food that they might want, so for example, they've got a sweet tooth and they're craving chocolate, as soon as they have that, they end up binging on that food. So I think really practicing throughout multiple diets is probably going to be the best option here. Finding out what works best for you. So either following a meal plan, where you're pretty much having the same foods every single day, and therefore you're not really thinking about what your next meal is. You're not having that decision fatigue with regards to what you're picking for your next meal. You know exactly what you're eating with each meal, and therefore that can really minimize food focus. Or if you want to track macros, if you find FitFit macros your best option, because that allows you to have a variety of foods, allows you to really enjoy the diet, and therefore you can stick to it. Usually what I find is best is combining both of these. So creating a meal plan of a load of different foods that you enjoy is usually what's best in terms of adherence, because you're having that structure with regards to you know exactly what you're eating for your next meal, but at the same time you're enjoying the diet, you're enjoying the foods that you're eating, and therefore can stick to it in the long term. So basically find what works best for you, find what you can be the most adherent with, and then stick with that. So next up, we've got cardio. So when should you implement cardio? How much cardio should you do? So the main thing you want to think about here is that cardio is a tool to increase energy expenditure. That's all it is. You want to increase cardio to basically allow yourself to have more food throughout the day, and therefore hopefully have more food around your workout in order to maintain training performance to a greater degree. So like with food being tapered down, your expenditure or your cardio should slowly be tapered up throughout a diet in order to create the deficit but not have to pull food so low. So the type of cardio which I recommend is always going to be LISS cardio. So this is low intensity, steady state cardio, whether that be steps or a piece of cardio equipment at a low heart rate or low intensity. Those are going to be the best option for you with regards to decreasing the recovery demand from those cardio sessions, and therefore not affecting your training performance going forward. I'd also keep cardio as far away from training as possible to make sure that it's not affecting performance. Usually I find that the most practical times to do cardio are either going to be fasting in the morning just because it feels good, but also post-workout. So that is very far away from your next workout window if you think about it, and that's not really going to affect your performance in the following session because it's so far away. So either fasted or post-workout are probably going to be your best options for cardio timing. And the final thing I wanted to speak about with regards to cardio is not overdoing it. Overdoing cardio can have a big impact on your NEAT throughout the day, so your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, to just your general activity throughout the day. A lot of research has shown that people who do a lot of cardio basically down-regulate the amount of activity they're doing outside of these exercise sessions, and therefore, on the whole, the total daily energy expenditure is going to be about the same either way. So probably implementing a little bit of cardio every day is probably going to be more effective than implementing a lot of cardio on a daily basis. The final section on this video is going to be all about managing fatigue. So you've basically got two different types of fatigue. You've got training fatigue and you've got diet fatigue. If anyone watches the podcast, you'll know what diet fatigue is. Training fatigue is going to be very similar to what it is in a gaining phase. So as you train and as you progress, you're going to slowly accumulate more and more stress on the body. At some point, you're going to have to relieve this stress or relieve this fatigue, and therefore you're going to need to implement a deload or a devolume week like you would in a gaining phase. However, these weeks are probably going to be less often in a dieting phase just because progression is less regular, and therefore the amount of fatigue you're accumulating over a mesocycle is probably going to be a little bit less. But on the whole, it's the exact same as a gaining phase. You're still going to need to devolume, you're still going to need to deload to make sure you're managing fatigue across the whole diet. Next, you've got diet fatigue. So basically, when you're dieting, that deficit that you're creating is a stressor on the body. As I mentioned earlier, your body is then going to make adaptations to try and relieve that stress, try and pull you back to maintenance. So it's going to increase lethargy, it's going to increase your hunger. These adaptations try and pull you out the deficit and back to maintenance. To try and relieve some of those effects of diet fatigue, what we can do throughout a diet is implement diet breaks and refeeds along the way. So these are periods of time with higher food in which we can then reverse some of these metabolic adaptations. What I really like to do is combine a devolume week or a deload week with a diet break, so you're managing both of these fatigues at the same time. You're dropping off a lot of stress within the same week. That can be really refreshing for the individual mentally, and also help a lot with training performance and sticking to the diet over the long term. So next time you do a diet, try and implement that. Try and implement a diet break alongside a deload week and see how you feel after that. And hopefully that allows you to stick to your diet a lot more easily in the long term. So yeah, that's pretty much the video done, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you learned a lot about how to effectively do a diet and how to get shredded for summer, basically. I'm coming into the final few weeks of my prep now, so hopefully I've got some good content coming for you guys, and I'll see you on the next video.